The Arizona sun hammered down on the dusty main street of Copper Ridge like a blacksmith's anvil, sending waves of heat shimmering off the wooden boardwalks. Jake Morrison pulled his worn hat low over his eyes as he hitched his bay gelding to the post outside Murphy's general store. The leather of his saddle creaked with age, much like his bones after another sleepless night on the ranch. 3 months without rain had turned his cattle operation into a losing proposition. The creek that fed his land had dwindled to a trickle, and half his herd had already been sold off just to keep the bank from foreclosing. At 38, Jake felt like an old man, carrying the weight of too many losses and too few victories. The store's bell jangled as he pushed through the door, grateful for the shade. Murphy looked up from behind the counter, his round face creased with concern. "Jake, good to see you in town. How's the ranch holding up?" "Been better, Murphy. Just need some supplies and I'll be out of your hair." Jake moved through the narrow aisles, gathering what little he could afford: coffee, beans, ammunition for his Winchester. As he approached the counter, a cluster of men near the front window caught his attention. They were studying something with intense interest, their voices low and urgent. "That's $1,000 right there," one of them muttered. "More money than most of us see in 5 years." "I'd have to be crazy to go after an Apache alone," another replied, "especially her. They say she's killed more white folk than Geronimo himself." Jake's curiosity got the better of him. He set his goods on the counter and wandered over to the group. What he saw stopped him cold. A wanted poster, fresh from the territorial governor's office, was tacked to the wall beside the window. The paper was crisp and new, the ink still dark. But it was the face staring back at him that made his blood run cold. "Wanted, dead or alive, Aiyana, Apache raider, $1,000 reward." The drawing was detailed, clearly done by someone who'd gotten a good look at the subject. High cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to hold both intelligence and defiance, long black hair braided with what looked like colored beads. She couldn't have been more than 20, but the poster described her as extremely dangerous and responsible for numerous attacks on white settlements. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he studied the image. Something about those eyes stirred memories he'd tried to bury. Memories of his wife Sarah's face, of his daughter Emma's laughter, of the day he'd come home to find their wagon burned and their bodies. "Are you thinking about going after her, Morrison?" Jake turned to find Tom Bradley, a local rancher who'd lost stock to Apache raids the previous year. Bradley's eyes held the same bitter anger that Jake recognized in his own mirror each morning. $1,000 would solve a lot of problems, Jake said carefully. It would at that. But she's not just any Apache. They say she's smart, real smart, plans the raids, knows the territory better than any white man. She's been hitting ranches from here to Tucson, always one step ahead of the cavalry. Jake studied the poster again. The description mentioned she was last seen near the Dragoon Mountains, about 2 days' hard ride south. Dangerous territory, full of canyons and hidden springs that only the Apache knew about. "Course there's others thinking the same thing," Bradley continued. "Dutch Henley and his boys rode out yesterday morning. Said they were going to bring back her scalp and claim that reward." The mention of Dutch Henley made Jake's stomach turn. Henley was a bounty hunter with a reputation for brutality, the kind of man who'd shoot a suspect in the back and claim self-defense. If he found this Apache girl first... "Murphy, I'll need more ammunition," Jake said abruptly. "And jerky. Enough for a week." Murphy's eyebrows rose. "You're not seriously thinking of..." "I'm thinking $1,000 would save my ranch," Jake cut him off, "and maybe settle some old scores while I'm at it." As Jake paid for his expanded supplies, his mind was already working through the logistics. He knew the Dragoon Mountains well enough. He'd tracked rustlers through those canyons before. His horse was strong, his aim was true, and he had nothing left to lose. The other men watched him load his saddlebags with a mixture of respect and concern. Going after a dangerous Apache raider alone was either very brave or very stupid, and most of them couldn't decide which. "You be careful out there, Jake," Murphy called as he headed for the door. "That girl's got blood on her hands, and she won't hesitate to add yours to the count." Jake touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, but didn't reply. As he swung into his saddle, he took one last look at the poster through the window. Those dark eyes seemed to follow him, holding secrets he couldn't begin to imagine. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as Jake spurred his horse south toward the Dragoon Mountains. Behind him, the dust of Copper Ridge settled back into the street. Ahead lay 2 days of hard riding, dangerous territory, and a confrontation that would change everything he thought he knew about justice, revenge, and the thin line between civilization and survival. The wanted poster had promised $1,000 for the Apache girl named Aiyana. What Jake didn't know was that he was about to discover the true price of that bounty and whether he was man enough to pay it. The second day of tracking led Jake deep into the twisted canyons of the Dragoon Mountains. His horse picked its way carefully along a narrow ledge, loose stones clattering into the ravine below. The November air carried a sharp bite that promised winter wasn't far behind, and Jake pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders. He'd been following sign for the better part of the morning, unshod hoofprints, bent branches, and the occasional scuff mark on rock that told him someone had passed this way recently. Whether it was his quarry or just another Apache moving through their ancestral hunting grounds, he couldn't be sure. The canyon opened into a small valley dotted with juniper and oak trees. Jake dismounted and ground-hitched his horse, then crept forward on foot, Winchester in hand. Years of hunting had taught him patience, and something about this place felt different, too quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath. That's when he heard the voices. Jake dropped to one knee behind a boulder, straining to listen. The voices were speaking English, not Apache, and they carried the rough edge of men accustomed to violence. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing. Moving as silently as possible, Jake worked his way closer to the sound. What he saw when he peered around a stand of oak trees made his blood run cold, but not for the reasons he'd expected. 3 white men had surrounded a young Apache woman near a small spring. Even from a distance, Jake could see it was her. The face from the wanted poster was unmistakable, but these weren't bounty hunters. These were outlaws, and they weren't interested in taking her alive. "You've been causing us a lot of trouble, squaw," the tallest of the 3 was saying. He wore a cavalry hat, though Jake doubted he'd ever served honorably. "Following us around, warning folks about our business? That stops today." The Apache woman, Aiyana, stood with her back to the spring, her hands empty, but her stance defiant. "Your business is theft and murder," she said in clear, unaccented English. "You dress like my people to hide your crimes, but I know who you really are, Cole Patterson." Jake's eyes widened. Cole Patterson was a known outlaw with a price on his head almost as high as the one on the Apache girl. If these men were his gang, then everything Jake thought he knew about the recent raids was wrong. "Smart girl," Patterson sneered. "Too smart for your own good. You should have stayed on the reservation with the rest of your people instead of playing detective." One of Patterson's men, a stocky fellow with a scraggly beard, spoke up. "We gonna do this quiet-like, or are you gonna make us chase you all over these mountains?" "I'm not running from you," Aiyana replied, "and I'm not alone." Patterson laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "That's where you're wrong, girl. My boys have been watching these trails for 2 days. Ain't nobody coming to help you." Jake's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place now. The attacks blamed on Apache raiders, the perfect timing that always seemed to catch the cavalry off guard, the way the raiders seemed to know exactly which ranches and wagons to hit. These men had been using Apache disguises and weapons to cover their tracks, letting the real Apache take the blame. And this woman, this supposed dangerous raider, had been trying to expose them. Patterson drew his gun, a well-maintained Colt that gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Nothing personal, you understand. Just business. Can't have you telling tales about our operation." Jake didn't remember making the decision to act. One moment he was crouched behind the trees. The next, he was standing in the open with his Winchester leveled at Patterson's chest. "I'd say that's far enough, Patterson." The 3 outlaws spun toward him, hands moving toward their weapons. Jake's voice carried the calm authority of a man who'd been in more than his share of gunfights. "Name's Jake Morrison, and I suggest you boys think real careful about your next move. I've got a Winchester pointed at your leader's heart, and I don't miss at this range." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "This ain't your fight, mister. You'd best ride on if you know what's good for you." "Maybe not," Jake replied, never taking his eyes off the outlaw leader. "But I've got a problem with men who prey on women, regardless of their color." The Apache woman was watching him with those same dark eyes from the poster, but now Jake could see something in them he'd missed before: intelligence, courage, and a flicker of hope. "You know who I am?" Patterson asked, his gun still trained on Aiyana. "I know exactly who you are. Question is, do you know who she is?" Patterson's laugh was bitter. "She's a dead Apache squaw, that's who she is." "She's the woman who's been trying to stop you," Jake said. "The one who's been warning people about your raids. You've been using Apache weapons and dress to make folks think it's Indian troubles, but she's been following you, trying to prove the truth." The stocky outlaw shifted nervously. "Cole, we need to finish this and get out of here. That reward poster's got every bounty hunter in the territory looking for her. Reward poster? Jake's voice carried a note of realization. You boys put up that poster, didn't you? Made her look like the leader of the raid so nobody would listen if she tried to tell the truth about you. Patterson's silence was answer enough. The whole thing had been a setup from the beginning. Frame the Apache woman who was getting too close to the truth, put a bounty on her head and let greed do the rest. That's real clever, Jake continued. But you made one mistake. You assumed everyone would be so blinded by that $1,000 that they wouldn't ask questions. And you're different, Patterson sneered. Jake's grip tightened on his rifle. Let's just say I've learned the hard way that things aren't always what they seem. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, 3 guns against 1, but Jake had the advantage of position and surprise. More importantly, he had the advantage of being right. Here's what's going to happen, Jake said. You're going to holster your weapons and ride out of here, and you're going to stop using Apache disguises for your robberies. Or what? Or I'm going to make sure the territorial marshal knows exactly who's been behind these raids, and I'm going to make sure this young woman lives to tell her story. Patterson's face twisted with rage, but Jake could see the calculation in his eyes. The outlaw was weighing his chances, trying to decide if he could draw on fire before Jake's Winchester sent him to hell. The moment hung suspended like a drop of water on a cliff's edge, ready to fall into violence or salvation with the slightest shift of wind. The tension shattered like glass when Patterson's hand moved toward his gun. Jake's Winchester barked once, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from the outlaw's boots. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. Next one goes through your chest, Jake warned, working the lever action smoothly. Your choice? Patterson's face went pale, but his eyes burned with fury. You're making a big mistake, Morrison. That Apache killed your own kind. No, Jake said quietly. You did that. You and your boys, wearing war paint and feathers to make folks think it was Indian trouble. The stocky outlaw was sweating now, his hand hovering near his pistol. Cole, we can take him. He's just one man. Against 3 of you, maybe, a new voice said from the rocks above. But not against both of us. Jake's eyes flicked upward to see Aiyana perched on a ledge about 15 feet up, a captured cavalry carbine trained on Patterson's men. She must have scaled the rock face while they were focused on Jake, a feat that would have impressed him even without the circumstances. Now you're outnumbered, Jake said, and she's got the high ground. Patterson's jaw worked furiously, but he wasn't stupid. 2 rifles against 3 pistols with one of the rifles positioned above them was not good odds. This ain't over, Patterson snarled. There's still a $1,000 bounty on her head. Every gun in the territory will be looking for her. Then I guess we'll have to do something about that, Jake replied. Mount up, Patterson ordered his men. We're leaving. The 3 outlaws backed toward their horses, hands carefully away from their weapons. Jake kept his rifle trained on them, while Aiyana maintained her position on the rocks. Patterson, Jake called out as the outlaws prepared to ride. If I hear about any more raids blamed on the Apache, I'll come looking for you, and next time I won't be so generous. Patterson spat in the dirt. You're a dead man, Morrison. Both of you. The outlaws rode out of the canyon at a hard gallop, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Jake waited until the sound faded completely before lowering his rifle. Aiyana climbed down from the rocks with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent her life in this harsh country. Up close, Jake could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 19 or 20, but her eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd seen too much too soon. How you could have been killed, she said, her English precise and clear. Why did you help me? Jake studied her face, seeing not the savage from the wanted poster, but a young woman fighting for justice in a world that had already condemned her. Because I've spent too many years hating the wrong people for the wrong reasons. She nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. You lost someone to raiders. My wife and daughter, 3 years ago. The words still tasted bitter. Found their wagon burned, their bodies. He stopped, unable to finish. I'm sorry, Aiyana said simply, but it wasn't my people who killed them. Patterson's gang has been operating for over 4 years. They've been very careful to make their crimes look like Apache raids. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. How do you know that? Because I've been tracking them for 2 years, ever since they killed my brother and made it look like he died in a fight with cavalry soldiers. Her voice carried a pain that mirrored his own. He was trying to make peace, meeting with a white rancher about safe passage for our people. Patterson and his men murdered them both and took their scalps to sell. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The reward poster was their idea. They knew I was getting close to the truth. that I had evidence of their crimes, so they painted me as a war leader, put a bounty on my head, and let greed do the rest. She met his eyes steadily. You came here to kill me for that money. It wasn't a question. Jake nodded, shame burning in his chest. I needed the money. My ranch is failing, the bank's foreclosing, but even if I hadn't seen the truth about Patterson, I don't think I could have gone through with it. Why? Jake thought about it, trying to find words for feelings he didn't fully understand himself. Because you have the same look in your eyes that my daughter had. Like you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those dark, intelligent eyes. What will you do now? Help you prove the truth, Jake said without hesitation. Patterson was right about one thing. That bounty will bring every gun in the territory down on you. We need to clear your name and expose his gang. We? There was surprise in her voice. Unless you'd rather handle this alone. She almost smiled. A week ago I would have said yes. But Patterson's getting desperate. He's making mistakes, taking bigger risks. And now that he knows I have help, she shrugged. 2 people can cover more ground than one. Jake extended his hand. Partners, then. At least until we get this sorted out. Aiyana looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then clasped it firmly. Her grip was strong, calloused from hard work and harder living. Partners, she agreed. But there's something you should know. Patterson wasn't lying about every bounty hunter in the territory looking for me. Dutch Henley and his crew are already on my trail, and they're not the only ones. Jake grimaced. He'd heard stories about Dutch Henley, a man who collected scalps first and asked questions later. How close are they? Close enough. I've been staying ahead of them, but barely. And now that Patterson knows where I am, he might try to flush me out into the open. Then we need to move fast, Jake said. Do you have evidence? Something that proves Patterson's behind the raids? Aiyana reached into a leather pouch at her belt and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. Inside was a cavalry button, tarnished but still recognizable, and a piece of fabric that looked like it had been torn from a blue uniform. I found these at the site of the last raid, she said. Patterson's men were sloppy. They left these behind when they changed out of their disguises. Jake examined the items carefully. They were good evidence, but would they be enough to convince a territorial judge, especially with $1,000 bounty clouding everyone's judgment? We need more, he said. Something that directly links Patterson to the crimes. I know where they're planning their next raid, Aiyana said. There's a supply wagon heading north from Tucson, carrying payroll for the mining camps. Patterson's been watching it for weeks. Jake's mind raced. If we could catch them in the act? Without their Apache disguises, proving they're white men committing the crimes. Aiyana nodded. But it's dangerous. They'll be expecting trouble, and if we're wrong about the timing, we'll be walking into a trap. Jake shouldered his rifle. When's the wagon supposed to pass through? Tomorrow morning, just after dawn. There's a narrow pass about 10 miles north of here where the road curves around a big rock formation. Perfect spot for an ambush. Jake looked up at the sky, noting the position of the sun. That gives us about 18 hours to get in position and figure out how to handle this without getting ourselves killed. Or captured by bounty hunters, Aiyana added grimly. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Multiple horses, riding hard and getting closer. Jake and Aiyana exchanged a look of understanding. Their partnership was about to be tested much sooner than either of them had expected. This way, Aiyana said, already moving toward a narrow trail that led deeper into the mountains. I know these canyons better than they do. We can lose them in the maze. Jake grabbed his horse's reins and followed her up the treacherous path. Behind them, the hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by the harsh voices of men who killed for money and asked no questions. The race was on. The narrow mountain trail twisted like a snake through towering rock formations, barely wide enough for Jake's horse to navigate. Aiyana moved ahead on foot, her moccasins silent on the stone as she led them deeper into the maze of canyons that honeycombed the Dragoon Mountains. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers echoed off the canyon walls, growing fainter as the Apache woman's knowledge of the terrain proved its worth. Jake counted at least 6 different voices, maybe more. Too many for a fair fight, even with the advantage of high ground. There, Aiyana whispered, pointing to a narrow ledge about 20 feet above the trail. We can rest the horses and watch the back trail. Jake looked up at the seemingly impossible climb. How do we get the horses up there? We don't. There's a hidden box canyon about 100 yards ahead where they'll be safe, but we need to move now. They're closer than they sound. As if to prove her point, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon. followed by the whine of a bullet ricocheting off rock somewhere below them. "They're shooting at shadows," Jake muttered, but he quickly led his horse forward to the canyon Aiyana had indicated. The box canyon was indeed hidden, its entrance concealed by a fall of boulders that looked natural but had clearly been arranged by human hands. Apache hands, Jake realized, noting the careful placement that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. "Your people use this place?" he asked, as they settled the horses with water from a small spring. "For generations. My grandfather's grandfather carved some of these handholds." Aiyana was already climbing the rock face with practiced ease. "It's sacred ground. No blood has ever been spilled here." Jake followed more slowly, his boots scraping against the stone. He'd done his share of climbing, but Aiyana moved like she was born to it, finding holds where he saw only smooth rock. From the ledge, they had a commanding view of the trail below. Jake could see dust clouds marking the progress of their pursuers, still a good distance back but moving steadily forward. "Dutch Henley?" Jake asked, squinting at the distant riders. Aiyana nodded grimly. "I recognize that big roan he rides, and the man beside him on the paint horse. That's Joaquin Morales. They say he can track a ghost across solid rock. Can he track us here? Maybe, but not quickly and not quietly. These canyons carry sound for miles. We'll hear them coming long before they find us." Jake settled back against the rock wall, grateful for the respite. The morning's confrontation with Patterson and the subsequent flight had taken more out of him than he'd realized. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and the constant tension was wearing on him. "Tell me about this payroll wagon," he said. "How do you know Patterson's planning to hit it?" Aiyana was quiet for a moment, her eyes scanning the canyon below. "I've been watching his gang for months. They have a pattern. They scout potential targets for weeks, learning the routes, the schedules, the number of guards. 3 weeks ago, I saw 2 of his men watching the road from Tucson. They've been back 4 times since then." "You're sure it's tomorrow?" "The wagon only runs twice a month, always on the same schedule. And yesterday I saw Patterson himself at the ambush site, checking sight lines and escape routes." She turned to look at him. "If we're going to stop them, we need to be in position before dawn." Jake nodded, but his mind was working through the logistics. "Even if we catch them in the act, prove they're white men and not Apache, how do we get word to the authorities? Patterson's gang isn't going to just surrender, and we can't fight them all." "I've been thinking about that." Aiyana reached into her pouch and pulled out a small mirror, polished to a bright shine. "There's a cavalry patrol that passes through Devil's Canyon every 3 days. They should be coming through tomorrow afternoon. If we can signal them, they'll come running." Jake felt a spark of hope. "But that still leaves us holding off Patterson's gang for hours." "Not if we're smart about it." Aiyana's eyes gleamed with a plan. "The ambush site has only one good escape route, a narrow trail that leads up into the rocks. If we can block that trail, force them to stay in the open, the cavalry will catch them red-handed." Jake was beginning to see the possibilities. "But we'll need to time it perfectly." A shout from below interrupted their planning. Jake peered over the edge to see Dutch Henley and his men at the base of the cliff, their horses blowing hard from the chase. "I know you're up there, Apache," Henley's voice carried clearly in the thin air. "Come down peaceful, and I'll make it quick." Jake could see the bounty hunter clearly now, a big man with a salt and pepper beard, wearing a long coat that had seen better days. His rifle was already in his hands, and his eyes were scanning the rock face above him. "What about your friend?" Henley continued. "The rancher who's been helping you, there's no bounty on him, but interference with a lawful capture, well, that's a hanging offense." Aiyana put a hand on Jake's arm as he started to move. "Don't," she whispered. "He's trying to make you angry, make you do something stupid." "Maybe we should talk to him," Jake whispered back. "Explain what we know about Patterson. He won't listen. Men like Henley don't care about truth or justice. They only care about money." Her voice was bitter with experience. "I've seen what bounty hunters do to Apache prisoners. Even if they believe us, they'll still turn me in and collect the reward." Below them, Henley was conferring with his men. Jake could see them spreading out, looking for ways up the cliff face. It wouldn't take them long to find the handholds that Aiyana had used. "We need to go," Aiyana said. "There's another way down, but it's treacherous, especially in the dark." Jake looked at the sky. The sun was already touching the western peaks, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. Soon it would be full dark, and navigating these mountains would become even more dangerous. "What about the horses?" "We'll have to leave them, but there's another cache about 5 miles north of here. My people keep supplies hidden throughout these mountains." Jake felt a pang at the thought of abandoning his faithful horse, but survival came first. "Lead the way." They were just starting to move when the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon. Jake heard the bullet whistle past his ear, close enough to feel the wind of its passage. "There!" Morales shouted from below. "On the ledge!" More shots followed, ricocheting off the rocks around them. Jake pressed himself against the cliff face, his heart pounding. These men weren't interested in taking prisoners alive. "This way!" Aiyana was already moving, scrambling along the ledge toward what looked like a sheer drop. "Trust me!" Jake followed, bullets whining around them as Henley's men found their range. The ledge narrowed to barely a foot wide, then seemed to disappear entirely. But Aiyana didn't hesitate. She swung herself over the edge and vanished. Jake looked down and saw nothing but empty air and jagged rocks hundreds of feet below. For a moment, his courage failed him. Then another bullet sparked off the stone inches from his head, and he forced himself to move. His hands found the handholds that Aiyana had used, carved into the rock face generations ago by Apache hands. The descent was harrowing, made worse by the growing darkness and the continued rifle fire from above. When his boots finally touched solid ground, Jake found himself in a narrow ravine he hadn't even seen from the ledge. Aiyana was waiting for him, her face grim in the fading light. "They'll follow," she said, "but not until morning. These cliffs are too dangerous to climb in the dark even for men like them." Jake nodded, still catching his breath from the terrifying descent. "How long to reach the ambush site? If we push hard, we can be there by dawn, but it won't be easy. We'll have to travel through the night, and these mountains are full of dangers." "More dangerous than Dutch Henley?" Aiyana smiled grimly. "At least the mountains are honest about wanting to kill you." They set off into the growing darkness, following trails that were invisible to Jake's eyes, but clear as highways to his Apache guide. Behind them, the shouts of frustrated bounty hunters echoed through the canyon, but the sounds grew fainter with each mile. Ahead lay the most dangerous part of their mission, stopping Patterson's raid and proving Aiyana's innocence. But first, they had to survive the night in country that had claimed the lives of countless travelers who thought they could master its secrets. The stars were coming out now, cold and distant in the desert sky. Jake pulled his coat tighter and followed Aiyana deeper into the maze of stone and shadow, trusting his life to a woman the world had branded as his enemy. Dawn came like a whisper across the desert, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Jake and Aiyana lay hidden among the rocks overlooking the narrow pass where the Tucson Road wound between towering stone formations. They'd been in position for an hour, cold and stiff from the night's hard travel, but alert and ready. Below them, the road curved sharply around a massive boulder, creating the perfect blind spot for an ambush. Jake could see why Patterson had chosen this place. A wagon would have to slow down to navigate the turn, and there were multiple escape routes leading up into the rocks. "There," Aiyana whispered, pointing to movement in the shadows across the pass. Patterson's men taking position. Jake squinted and could just make out figures moving among the rocks on the far side of the road. They were dressed in their Apache disguises again, war paint, feathers, traditional weapons mixed with modern firearms. To any survivor, it would look exactly like an Indian raid. "I count 4, Jake murmured. "Where's Patterson?" "He usually stays back, lets his men do the dirty work, but he'll be close enough to take command if things go wrong." Aiyana checked the loads in her carbine. "Remember, we need to let them start the attack. We have to catch them in the act." Jake nodded, though every instinct screamed at him to intervene before innocent people were hurt. The wagon would be carrying guards, maybe even passengers, good people who didn't deserve to die for Patterson's greed. The sound of approaching wheels and hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. Jake felt his pulse quicken as a heavy freight wagon came into view, pulled by 6 strong mules and escorted by 4 cavalry troopers. The payroll shipment, right on schedule. The wagon slowed as it approached the curve, the driver calling out to his team. That's when Patterson's men struck. War whoops filled the air as the disguised outlaws burst from their hiding places, rifles blazing. One of the cavalry escorts went down immediately, tumbling from his horse with a cry of pain. The other soldiers tried to form a defensive line, but they were caught completely off guard. "Now," Jake breathed, but Aiyana grabbed his arm. "Wait, we need them to show their faces." It was agony watching the fight below, but Jake forced himself to wait. The wagon driver was trying to turn his team around, but the narrow road and panicked mules made it impossible. 2 more soldiers fell, and Jake could see the outlaws closing in for the kill. Then one of Patterson's men made a crucial mistake. His war paint, hastily applied in the pre-dawn darkness, began to streak with sweat. As he moved into the sunlight, Jake could clearly see pale skin beneath the disguise. "There's our proof," Jake said grimly. He raised his Winchester and took careful aim. His first shot took the disguised outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him around and revealing his white features to anyone still alive to see. Aiyana's carbine barked a second later, and another of Patterson's men went down. "What the hell?" one of the surviving outlaws shouted, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Pure English, no Apache accent. The remaining cavalry soldiers, given a reprieve by the unexpected intervention, rallied quickly. Professional soldiers, they recognized an opportunity when they saw one and began returning fire with disciplined volleys. Jake saw a figure on horseback emerge from the rocks above the road, Cole Patterson himself, his face twisted with rage as he realized his carefully planned ambush was falling apart. "Morrison!" Patterson's voice echoed through the canyon. "I should have killed you yesterday." Patterson spurred his horse toward the road, pistol in hand, trying to salvage what he could of the situation, but Jake was already moving, scrambling down the rock face toward the battle below. The surviving outlaws were caught between the cavalry soldiers and Jake's position, their Apache disguises now more liability than asset. One of them threw down his rifle and raised his hands, shouting his surrender. The other tried to run but was brought down by a cavalry carbine. Patterson, seeing his men defeated, wheeled his horse around and headed for the escape trail, but Aiyana was waiting for him, positioned perfectly to block his retreat. "Going somewhere, Patterson?" she called out, her rifle trained on his chest. The outlaw leader's face went pale as he recognized her. "You Apache witch, you've ruined everything." "No," Aiyana said calmly. "I've exposed everything. These soldiers have seen your men's real faces. They know you're not Apache." Below them, Jake was helping the wounded cavalry officer to his feet. The sergeant, despite a bullet graze on his arm, was already securing the surviving outlaws and stripping away their disguises. "Sergeant," Jake called up to them, "this is Cole Patterson, the leader of the gang. They've been disguising themselves as Apache to cover their crimes." Patterson's hand moved toward his gun, but Aiyana's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't. I've been tracking you for 2 years, learning your habits. I know you favor your left hand, and I know you're not fast enough." The outlaw leader's shoulders sagged in defeat. "What do you want?" "Justice," Aiyana said simply. "For my brother, for all the innocent people you've killed, and for the Apache people you've blamed for your crimes." Jake climbed up to join them, breathing hard from the exertion. In the distance, he could see dust clouds approaching, more cavalry, drawn by the sound of gunfire. "It's over, Patterson," Jake said. "Your men are captured, your disguises are exposed, and there are plenty of witnesses to testify about what really happened here." Patterson spat in the dirt. "You think this changes anything? There's still a bounty on her head. Every gun in the territory. We'll learn the truth," Jake interrupted. "About you, about your gang, and about the real Apache woman who helped bring you to justice." The approaching cavalry patrol arrived in a thunder of hoofbeats, led by a young lieutenant who took in the scene with quick, intelligent eyes. Jake and Aiyana spent the next hour explaining the situation, showing their evidence, and watching as the truth finally came to light. The cavalry button and fabric Aiyana had collected, combined with the testimony of the surviving soldiers and the captured outlaws, painted a clear picture of Patterson's crimes. More importantly, it cleared Aiyana's name and exposed the lie behind the wanted poster. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jake found himself standing beside Aiyana, on a small rise overlooking the scene below. Patterson and his surviving men were bound and ready for transport to the territorial prison. The wounded soldiers were being tended to, and the payroll wagon was preparing to continue its journey. "What will you do now?" Jake asked. Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, watching the cavalry prepare to leave. "Return to my people, I suppose. Try to rebuild the trust that Patterson's crimes destroyed. And the bounty hunters, Dutch Henley and the others, we'll learn soon enough that there's no reward to be claimed." She turned to look at him. "What about you? Will you go back to your ranch?" Jake thought about it. The ranch that had seemed so important yesterday felt less urgent now. He'd lost everything once before and survived. Maybe it was time to build something new. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'll stick around these parts for a while. There's a lot of work to be done, helping people understand what really happened, making sure the truth gets told." Aiyana smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "That sounds like something my brother would have done. I'd like to hear about him sometime, about your people, your customs. I realize I don't know much about Apache ways. And I'd like to hear about your wife and daughter, about the man you were before grief changed you." Jake felt something ease in his chest, a knot of pain that had been there so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "I think they would have liked you. Sarah always said the best way to heal a hurt was to help someone else." The lieutenant approached them, his expression respectful. "Ma'am, sir, we'll need you both to testify at Patterson's trial. But I want you to know what you did here today, exposing the truth, saving those soldiers' lives. The territory owes you a debt." "Just make sure the truth gets told," Aiyana replied. "Make sure people know the Apache didn't commit these crimes." "You have my word." As the cavalry patrol rode away with their prisoners, Jake and Aiyana began the long walk back toward civilization. The wanted posters would come down, the bounty hunters would find other quarry, and slowly, carefully, the truth would spread. It wouldn't erase all the prejudice, all the mistrust that had built up over years of conflict. But it was a start. And sometimes, Jake reflected, a start was all you needed. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but somehow full of possibility. Behind them, the shadows were growing shorter as the sun climbed toward its zenith. Ahead lay the long work of healing, between peoples, between cultures, and within their own wounded hearts. But for the first time in 3 years, Jake Morrison felt like he was walking toward something instead of running away from it. And beside him, Aiyana walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced injustice and emerged victorious, not through violence, but through courage, truth, and the unlikely partnership of two people who had found redemption in helping each other. The Wild West was changing, one act of understanding at a time.